First on the agenda is to welcome you to a Common Ground meeting. This is the first one for the fall. We took the summer off, and we are glad to be back. The National Issues Forum is a national group that holds focus groups around the country on various issues, and based on the results of the conversations that they've had, they put together issue guides for other organizations to use around topics of interest. And this particular one is on elections. How should we encourage and safeguard voting? And Common Ground for Texans decided that we would host such a conversation. And so that's what we're going to do today. We'll start with a short video that summarizes the conversation. We will, I'll have a slideshow that I would like to show to open the conversation. And then I'll describe how the rest of the day will go. And I am delighted that you are all with us. And thank you very much.
All right. Welcome, everyone.
Hi. Hey, Andrea.
Let's get started. We're going to be talking about America's voting system, which really is the very foundation of our democracy.
As a first-generation American, I take the right to vote very seriously.
My relatives, not very far back, were denied the right to vote in this country, so I have very strong feelings about protecting those rights.
And you're not alone. Despite the pandemic, the U.S. had record voter turnout in the 2020 general election. Even so, almost a third of eligible Americans didn't vote, and only about a quarter of the population shows up for local elections. That's much lower turnout than most other developed countries.
Which is why we should make it easier to vote, not harder.
But some restrictions are there to make sure elections can be trusted.
I'm sure some people don't show up because they don't think their votes will matter.
Those are good points. A lot of people are concerned about the election system in the United States, but don't necessarily agree on what the main problems are or how to fix them. So today, we are going to deliberate on 3 options. These aren't the only options, but they're a starting point. Option 1 would make voting easier. Option 2 would focus on making voting more secure. And option 3 says we should offer more and better choices. Let's start with option 1. Would easing restrictions improve elections and voter turnout?
Historically, restrictions on voting and voter registration were designed to favor certain people over others, and still are.
And since the Constitution puts states in charge of their own elections, rules are very inconsistent from one state to the next.
Would more people vote if registration were simpler and more consistent?
Voter registration should just be automatic on the day you turn 18.
I see voting more as a privilege of citizenship. People should be willing to put in the effort.
What else would make voting more accessible to everyone?
I work extended schedules, and sometimes I can't take off work to go and vote. Now, I've never understood why Election Day isn't a national holiday.
A lot of working people probably still couldn't get the day off. Making early voting available in the weeks leading up to an election would give people more options.
Absolutely. A person shouldn't have to choose between voting or losing pay. And there should be more polling places so no one has to stand in line for 6 hours.
I live in a rural area, and people have to drive a long way to get to the courthouse for early voting. I don't know how our county could pay for more polls and longer hours.
That would be a drawback. Mail-in ballots seem like the answer to a lot of these problems.
I just don't know if we can trust mail-in ballots.
I'm not sure either, but it made it easier during the pandemic.
I think 2020 proved that mail-in voting is safe. The recounts didn't turn up any fraud in mail-in ballots.
I just think in-person voting with a valid photo ID is the best way to protect against voter fraud.
The problem is, a lot of older people and people in cities don't drive. And getting an official state photo ID when you're poor has its own set of problems. So requiring a driver's license disadvantages populations that already have low voter turnout.
With all different kinds of voting machines and ways to vote, it seems like there would be a lot of places where an interference could take place. Right? Just because it might not have happened doesn't mean it can't or won't.
Plus, people should have to give a legitimate reason why they need to vote absentee.
I don't think people should have to justify why they prefer to vote absentee. I do think more needs to be done to make sure elections are safe from interference by foreign governments and also by other groups that want to influence an election.
These are the kinds of doubts that lead to more political drama and division in our country.
Some people see their vote as meaningless. I think there are other changes we need to look at.
Could you explain a little further?
Have you ever looked at voting districts? Both sides draw them so that their candidates will win. We need to have independent commissions draw those districts fairly and get rid of gerrymandering.
Some states are already doing that, but I would want some oversight of those commissions, or we'd be back where we started.
If we're talking big changes, we should look at the Electoral College. It's not common, but a presidential candidate can win the popular vote, but lose the election and the presidency.
Rather than voters electing a president directly, our system gives each state a number of electors based on its population. Would Americans see the voting system as more legitimate if we eliminated the Electoral College in favor of a national popular vote?
It would require changing the Constitution.
That's getting into shaky ground. But the Electoral College also means that we are sort of stuck with the two-party system. I'd like independent candidates to actually have a chance of winning.
Well, to do that, we'd also have to change the way we finance elections, which wouldn't be a bad thing in my view. I mean, it would bring in more candidates to choose from.
It would be harder to weed out unqualified candidates, though. There are a lot of trade-offs to consider.
Getting back to the Electoral College, a popular vote would force candidates to campaign in all states, not just the swing states, which I...
Thank you all for participating and for listening thoughtfully to views you might not agree with.
We have different ideas for solutions, but it's clear that many Americans are worried about the integrity of our elections.
I think one thing we can agree on is that any options come with trade-offs.
And risks we might not even anticipate.
So let's keep talking.
Introduction into what we are going to try to accomplish this afternoon. And in anticipation of that, I've got a slideshow that I'm going to try to see if I can share my screen and get my slides up. Get it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to the National Issues Forum. This is what we're going to do today. We've introduced the topic. We will connect to the issue by asking each of you to talk in a small group about what brought you here, why this affects you. We're going to consider each of the options equally, and then we'll do some reflections on what we learned, what surprised us. Has our needle moved in any direction at all? So I thought I would show a little bit of statistics to see where we've been. These statistics have to do with the 2020 election. The United States had a better turnout than it's ever had in an election. We had 66.7% of registered voters voting. In Texas, we had an increase of 6.6% higher turnout in 2020 than we did in 2016. But the interesting thing for me is to take a look at the number of early voters versus the number of election day voters. And then in Travis County, we had a 5.9% higher turnout in 2020 than we did in 2016. And again, the number of early voters was astronomically different. When you take a look at some of these options, I think it's important for you to see a little bit about what's happened in the country as a whole. Here you can see the number of states that have automatic voter registration when you go to when you get your driver's license or when you visit a designated government office. Texas is not one of those states. Voter ID requirements. You can see the number of states that have voter ID requirements. Certainly most of those states are in the South, although not all of them. And one of the things that you could discuss is what photo IDs are the photo IDs that are being used or should be used. It was alluded that there are occasions where the Electoral College overrides the national popular vote. And in recent times, many of us remember the Gore v. Bush election where the Electoral College overrode the popular vote. And the same thing was true in 2016 with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Ground rules for today. Listen to others. Listening is just as important as speaking. Consider each of the options fairly. Everyone should be encouraged to participate. Keep an open mind. Maintain an open, respectful atmosphere. It's okay to disagree, but do so courteously and not with hostility. Those are the typical ground rules for many conversations that are held on what sometimes can be controversial issues. So what are we going to talk about? Option one. This option says that, well, make it easier to register and vote. This option says that giving every American a chance to vote should be a priority. And you can see that there are various situations where making it easier to register and to vote would be an advantage for certain types of people, but yet there are drawbacks as well. And so you'll consider some of those actions that could be taken and some of the drawbacks to those actions. Option two, do more to make elections secure. This option says that making elections more secure should be our priority. Again, you can see there are situations where actions might be taken that appear to be ones that you might support, but at the same time, there may be drawbacks associated with them. So what is the risk, the balance between the two? And then finally, option three is offer more and better choices. And once again, there will be a discussion of the Electoral College. There'll be a discussion of the two-party system. How do we encourage positive campaigning around the country rather than swing states only? And then again, there are drawbacks that you might want to consider and risks that we might not foresee. The National Issues Forum does like people to respond to them about their experience. So I will put this link in the chat if you'd like. If you have the issue advisory in front of you at the back, there's a little worksheet. And Common Ground for Texans would be really interested in your responses. And you can either email me in a paragraph your responses, or you can fill out the response form and send it to me by email, or I can put my address in the chat so you can see it there. Okay, so what's going to happen during the day today? We will spend about 100 minutes or so in these breakout rooms. And you'll be put in a breakout room with probably 4 other folks. And we'll have 10 minutes of each of you introducing, a total of 10 minutes to introduce each other so that you all are familiar with where you're coming from, who you are, what brought you here, why is this an important conversation for you. we will then go into a 30-minute conversation about option one. It'll be somewhere between 25 and 30 minutes because we'd like you to have a couple minutes break in between option one, option two, and option three. And then eventually we'll bring you back in one larger group and reflect on what happened during the day and what your impressions were and how you responded and whether this was a worthwhile afternoon. We have a number of people who will be facilitating, and my guess is that we'll probably have maybe 4 facilitators, right? And it will be Tobin. Say hello, Tobin is one. Mike is one. Susan Schultz is one. And Dorsey, is that okay?
You bet.
All right. And those others who volunteered to be facilitators, if you would like to be participants, that would be wonderful too. So I volunteered once and I'm going to be a participant because I like to participate in these conversations. And some of the facilitators have never taken part in one of these conversations. So it's a good training tool for them as well. So that's what we encourage. We'll ask each of the facilitators to introduce themselves when we go into that small group. I explained how we're going to move that breakout session. And then when it's all over, we'll bring you all back. And I hope you have a wonderful time. And Ham Richards is going to put you into a breakout room, and you will be in the same breakout room with the same people for the whole time. So you'll get a better feeling for what to expect. I can have the facilitators introduce themselves to everybody. So Tobin, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Tobin Careau. I retired a couple of years ago from Austin Community College, where I've been teaching for 30 years. And I have a background as a counselor, was trained in the NIF system along with Joanne, and background with mediation. So this really fits my normal approach to things, and I'm very delighted to have a chance to participate.
Dorsey.
I'm Dorsey Cartwright, and my career has been as a marriage and family therapist. And as I've kind of retired more and more from that, and particularly with so much division in 2016, I've become quite active in working with relationships within the political arena. I'm a co-founder of Texas No Labels and a moderator for Braver Angels. And I was really drawn to this with the concept of deliberation rather than debate. And my home's in Austin, but I'm currently here in Edmonton, Alberta, because my partner's Canadian. So we go back and forth.
Mike, why don't you introduce yourself? Sorry.
Yeah, it's Mike Ignatowski. I'm not retired from anything yet, but I've been a longtime member of Common Ground for Texans. Spent a lot of time helping facilitate the meetings and moderate the panel discussions. And before that, I was also heavily involved in something we used to call the Conversation Cafe in Austin. So I've had a lot of practice, and I'm a strong promoter in civil conversations. And I'm looking forward to the discussion here today.
And Susan.
I am retired from UT. I used to teach negotiation and mediation at the law school. And I did a lot of public policy dispute resolution with the Center for Public Policy at the law school. So I think it's great to have these conversations. I think that it's really essential to our democratic system that we are capable of talking and sharing ideas.
So I gather the breakout rooms are now ready. And so Ham will put us in a room and we'll see you in about an hour and a half. Have a good time. He's back. Okay. So I put in the chat the link to the National Issues Forum Survey Monkey. I don't know if it's still functioning or not, but if it is, go ahead and give your suggestions for
Well,
how you think it went. So I do have one question for everybody. Was the amount of time too short, just right, or too long? So
Just right.
just right.
that's right.
Just right. Okay, I thought it was just right too. Oh, hi, Kathy.
Yeah, Kathy joined in, I see.
Okay, yeah. Because every once in a while I've done these national issues forums and they've been truncated into like an hour and a half, and it's just been too short. It's just not enough time to really delve into a problem as deeply as we want. So we thought we might have a report out from each of the different groups, just to get an idea of what you talked about and what rose to the occasion. And then we'll also ask the question of reflection of whether you heard something that was new to you, and whether your opinions on this issue have fluctuated one way or the other for any reason. So I don't know who was the facilitator for group one.
Okay, I was the facilitator for group one, Joanne.
Did you have a
and
reporter?
I totally forgot to ask for somebody to be our reporter. So I will ask for a volunteer now. Who would be willing? We had Andy was in our group, and Marty, and Chuck, and Ed. Would one of you be willing to sort of share with everybody what you recall from our time together? You don't have to get everything. Okay, Ed, thank you.
Okay, let's see. Thanks to Dorsey for being a gentle and firm-handed moderator there. And we discussed all of the topics, and there were a few ideas. Chuck brought up the fact that we need to have more trust in each other, and I've kind of commented on that we have to have more trust in our institutions. Thank you. And there have been deliberate attempts of misinformation to destroy that trust. And there was a poll from NPR that said that back in January of last year, 31% of the people thought that misinformation was the greatest threat to the election. And that was the highest percentage down the list. The next one down was fraud, 24%. Let's see. We pretty much all of us wanted to kept thinking about ways of making elections more easier, making it easier for people to vote. I can bring up my ideas easier because I wrote them down. One of the ideas was with regards to election funding, public funding of elections was I don't think, and most of the people agreed, I think, that trying to fund these elections publicly by giving money to the candidates probably wouldn't work very well. But an alternative would be to give every registered voter or eligible voter a $200 voucher that he could then donate to candidates or parties. And that might offset some of the effects of PACs and the lobbyists with all the money that goes into elections. Let's see. And we thought that the election day holiday was probably not a very useful thing, given that they're essential workers wouldn't be able to take advantage of it. And if you have early voting, enough days of early voting and enough hours in those, there's no need to go down the path of a holiday. And let's see, anything else? I think that's about all I can think of at the moment.
Yeah, I think I would just add is that several people in our group had direct personal experiences trying to help people that were having a really difficult time being able to do what they needed to do in order to vote. And so our group in particular had stronger feelings around making the ease of voting and less concern about the security of it, but quite a variety when we came to talking about expanding candidates and things like that. And I'll let the others contribute as we open up to the larger group. Thank you, Ed.
Our group was fairly homogeneous. I mean, we didn't have differing opinions, so it wasn't as challenging as I thought it might be to listen respectfully, or I've been in other situations where I learn more because people have different views. And I don't think in our group we had different views.
You must have all the right answers then. Tell us.
No, we were aligned. We were more aligned than not aligned. So
there were moments.
Okay, well then let's go for Dorsey for president then. She did a great job and we so.
Okay. Thank you, Joanne.
You're welcome. Who's group 2? Don't all jump at once. I think I was group 4. Tobin, do you remember what group number you were?
I don't remember my group number.
Okay, well, why don't you go next?
Okay, and what I will do is say we had also a fairly receptive response to the action items, but we had some interesting new things suggested, and I will let some of the members of the group bring up things along those lines. Susanna had some things with a background in voting and registering and so forth. Susanna?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One that I brought up is like Joanne's favorite topic, but I do away with primaries and replace the whole thing with ranked choice voting. And I don't even know if that's your full idea, but I think we shouldn't even have primaries. It's just ranked choice voting everywhere. And this is something that I don't know how much everybody agrees with the thing, but it goes along the lines that the primaries, the way they are now, are kind of messed up. In terms of the voter registration, one of the things that we're talking about, and we have a perspective from somebody from California that has background, and then he will talk later, but that there's not even a need for voter registration. I mean, of course, online facilitating voter registration in any way, shape, or form would be helpful. But if you have Social Security, it's you turn 18, you're eligible to vote, you're registered. That's it. You just might have to figure out a way to track where people live so that they vote in the right place. But it's ridiculous to even have to register to vote if there is already a system federally that knows that you're a citizen and knows you're of age. And And then we went into some more details, but in general, we agree with most things. We just kind of brought some additional topics. And I think maybe I'll pass to Dan on some discussion of how to improve trust in the system by things that can be done from the security point of view without disenfranchising people.
Take it away, Dan.
Okay, well, in looking at security, it's important to break things down into different elements that all have to be done so that the overall result is secure. It starts from having valid voter rolls, and states and local jurisdictions are vastly all over the map on it, primarily because it costs money. If you were able to federally fund voter roll cleanup all across the country, you would have valid voter rolls without the abuses in the past, because there are now known best practices, for example, using official government death registries to get dead voters off the polls. So that's the starting point, number one, do valid voter rolls. Second is, how do you make sure that you have only valid votes, people who are actually on the voter rolls voted? And this can actually be done even if you're using mail-in ballots, by having a mechanism that essentially uses identification that people already have or that the voting jurisdiction will send them. So for example, just like if you get a debit card in the mail, you'll typically get a PIN number in a separate envelope. Something like that doesn't require people to go out and get an ID. They have to give it to them. Having mechanisms like that will give you extreme security in making sure that only valid votes would count. Also, it helps to have vote tracking systems that if you're doing vote by mail, you can see every step of the way where your ballot is. And I think 30 plus states do that already. So the last piece after that is, after all the votes are in, to make sure you have valid vote counting. And the most important thing there is paper ballots. So no matter what kind of alleged interference there is with the mechanics, the technology of voting, whether it's the Venezuelans or the Russians or anybody else, if you have paper ballots that say who people voted for, then you will be able to manually hand count the votes, just like they did in Arizona. And you can see that the original votes as tallied by the equipment actually does reflect the ballots themselves. So it's definitely possible to do all those things that we weren't done consistently in the last election because of lack of time. But if we start now, we could do this for next election and the future elections. And even though people might have doubts about past results, doing these things should help in the future. But the one thing it requires is money. So the last element of the recommendation is, let's have the federal government step in and guarantee the integrity of voting everywhere in the country, because all of us as citizens has a stake in the integrity of votes anywhere in the country.
Good deal. So thanks very much. So that was a wonderful presentation. Let's see, which group is next?
I think we were number 3.
Mike, yeah.
Yeah, so after we went around and did our introductions, I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to keep this conversation going for an hour and a half when everyone just automatically agrees with each other? Because it was obvious that was going to happen. But it was not a problem at all. This group had plenty to talk about. I took a bunch of notes, just a few highlights. Strong support for the John Lewis Voting Act, and a belief there should be some minimal national standards for voting, although there was some disagreement about what room there was for states' input into that. One interesting idea expressed was that voting is your duty, and when you turn 18, you should be required to march on down to the government office and register to vote, just like you were required to register for the draft at one time. Strong support for mail-in ballots, and belief that elections are much, much more honest now than they used to be. Some people had experience with living around Chicago at the time. And there was, I'll say, legitimate concern expressed over how you guarantee security for mail-in ballots. How do you know that the person who sent it in was actually the person whose name was on it? And that was acknowledged as a concern. One of our members introduced us to a term going around in right-wing circles called legacy citizens for ways to designate people who are true Americans. We all found that a little disturbing, but it was interesting to hear that. And we ended up with an interesting discussion at the end. It turns out that 3 of the 5 of us had worked as poll workers or in some way involved in elections. And we were all very impressed in our experience with the integrity of the voting officials that we worked with, Republican or Democrat, it didn't matter. They all seemed to be really honestly trying to do the best possible job they could. And although there was kind of unanimous disagreement with the whole idea that this election was stolen, there was acknowledgement that there was a breakdown in trust happening in our society, and we should probably be seriously doing something to do what we can to restore that trust, whether that's conducting audits or even if it's a window dressing type of activity. But it's important to really try to restore that trust that's failing in part of the political spectrum right now. So I'll leave it at that. If there's anyone else in the group wants to comment, feel free to.
What does the word legacy citizen mean? I'm still confused by that with the term.
Real Americans who have been here for multiple generations and who are not minorities.
Oh.
Like it doesn't count me.
Yeah.
So that means all the Native Americans, right?
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
So the last group was Susan Schultz's group, and I think Pam was going to report. So.
Yes, so I'll just hit some highlights. On option 1, we all agreed that early voting is a good thing to make voting easier, but suggested that perhaps some kind of standard that's universal would not make sense because of the differences in density. And so especially, urban versus rural counties, so that it should be some calculation of days and times based on the density. We talked also about automatic registering, and that there was a fear listed that, oh, that's an invasion of privacy, that, you shouldn't just automatically go onto a public roll. But we suggested that it could be an opt-in, option. So you could decline it and you wouldn't have to be on the list, but you could opt in at when you get your driver's license or at other government offices. And we agreed that we were unanimous in our agreement that felons who are off book, off paper, have completed their debt to society should be able to vote, and that we should all be working toward restorative justice and not, just punishment for the rest of your life. On option 2, doing more to make elections secure, we had the benefit of having Janine from Ohio, so we kind of compared the differences between Ohio and Texas. And we all agreed that you shouldn't have to have a reason to vote by mail. That should just be an option. That it is crazy to not start counting absentee ballots until the polls close on the day of the election, and that would go a long way toward kind of shortening, the worries at the end that all these votes are coming in all of a sudden. The purging of voter rolls, we just echoed something that somebody else said, that there do already exist best practices that should be followed by every Secretary of State, and it would be fairly easy to just make sure that, set that as a federal standard, whatever the best practices are. And we also suggested that even though our decentralized system is kind of a mess and everything is all different, that is actually probably a bug that makes everything more secure, because there can't be some, big hack or big, intervention in a decentralized system. And then on option 3, offering more and better choices, we were talking about there being a lot of misinformation out there and how that causes a lot of problems, and that perhaps a rule about radical transparency on, especially on social media like Facebook, that it must be super transparent, and funders of different messages must be transparent, be made accountable, and legally penalized should they be outright lying or whatever, and that might help if there was some discovery about kind of that misinformation and disinformation that's out there. We talked a lot about the Electoral College, and we didn't agree on that. All right, I guess I'll stop there.
Okay, so that are all the reports. I should probably let you all know that there is a wonderful article that was printed by the Brennan Center of Justice on security of mail-in ballots. And I can certainly send it to you, or you can go to the Brennan Center for Justice and do a search for it. But they did a pretty good job of describing some of the problems with solutions to those problems. So I'd encourage you to look at it. So I guess the last question for the last couple of minutes is, anybody want to share what their impression of the day was? Whether this was worthwhile, whether you learned something new?
I enjoyed talking to all you Texans. That was kind of a surprise. I thought this was a nationwide thing, but we all have the same problems.
We all have the same problems, exactly. So nationwide's fine.
The question is, how do we get this to people who can actually, will actually change the system?
Mm.
We've been thinking about that here in Seattle recently in our alliance, and one thing I've recommended is they consider inviting some of the local politicians to attend some of our different types of meetings, but do it in stealth, where they would be
participants.
They'd be observers.
Hmm.
Yeah, that takes the sideshow out of it. They're not there to have a campaign event. They're there to learn about what their constituents think.
Mm.
And that's the basis for their invitation. And then at the end, if they wanted to address some of those issues, they could make an appearance, a very brief appearance, but they would have an unfiltered access to people in their community that they represent without
Yep, good idea.
All that interplay of I need you to do this and I want you to do that.
So they would be hiding behind a mirror?
Well, you join, but yeah.
Like a psychology.
Mirror darkly, yeah. They would be there as guests, but you could say that we have a couple of guests observing and not identify them, so there wouldn't be a lot of performance art going on. But at the end, you could explain if they wanted to reveal themselves. But and it's a time thing, so maybe it's a staffer that does it. I don't know.
Anybody else want to share? Tobin.
You need to
Greg, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, a couple things I missed today. Me being a blue, we didn't put our badges up today, so I didn't know what I was walking into. Fair enough, didn't matter.
That was on purpose.
Yeah, and that's okay. And this is the first time I've missed my Republican friends. We did not have a lot of stress, tension in our discussion. We had a lot of agreement, which felt good. I'm not sure that we learn as much as we'd like to. I also missed today young people of color, and because it's a whole different thing. I'm here because I'm retired, and I have the whole day. I don't have any softball games to go to. I don't have any tutoring. I'm not working for my church. So there's some diversity that I think could be beneficial. How we make that happen, I have no idea.
Exactly. But, that is the problem, is how do we make it happen? Tobin.
Thank you. We had excellent.
This friend speaks my mind is a phrase we use at the Friends meeting. But that is an issue, and Braver Angels, I think, comes closest to managing to pull in, although not always is there as much tension as there is some deliberation, but it is harder for national issues forums, in my experience, to actually gather people who have a variety of opinions and perspectives. And that does leave us somewhat less informed, I think.
But on the other hand, there are also people who were in our groups who had different perspectives, who would agree on some things and disagree on others. So even though we may have similar experiences and our age, there's something to say for wisdom over time when you have voted so many times. Right?
Yeah, well, Tobin, there are a lot of people who are just afraid of group crazies. That's what we used to call group therapy, group crazies. They just, and I think a lot of people just don't like to talk about these issues.
Yeah,
they don't want to they don't want to end up in Family Feud.
Dorsey.
Yeah, one of the things I invited my group to experiment with, and I know it's not easy, and maybe in these kinds of situations, we could design something to help with that. But my experience is that we actually, each of us, probably the majority of people from what I'm hearing, leaned or had more invested in making registration voting easier than concerns about security. However, I know that within all of us, we have within us whatever's in others. And it can be really powerful to sort of use your imagination and put yourself in the other side's shoe and deliberately choose to kind of present their case and their point of view and their how they see things. Because one of the things that often happens in the doing of that is you really begin to tap into the underlying vulnerabilities that those people are carrying. And so I think that can be really useful, and then it translates into making it easier when you're talking to people with opposite opinions.
Well, in fact, in our group, we were able to do that to some extent because there was overwhelming agreement that we should be able to vote by mail. And I piped up that I know that there are reasons for why we should have in-person voting. And one of them, of course, being that I don't want my husband, Hamilton Richards, to look over my shoulder to see how I'm voting when I'm voting by mail. He can't walk into the voting booth with me and tell me how I should vote. And you don't know how many women I've talked to who've said, I've asked them, do you know how you're going to vote? And they'd say, no, because I haven't talked to my husband yet. Well, so there is a reason to have in-person voting. And so there is that give and take of, let's look at it from some other perspective. What are the downsides?
One of the things that I learned in my group was this idea that maybe we wanted to pay a little bit more attention to security in order to bolster the confidence in the voting system and the trust in the voting system by paying more attention to security things, that there were some concessions that we could make, which would help improve, voter participation and turnout and acceptance.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I just to add to that, there doesn't even have to be a concession. You can do security in a way that really has minimal impact on participation if you design the right security system. And certainly it's very easy to design a wrong security system requiring people to go through burdensome efforts to prove who they are. But so don't do that. There are alternatives to doing that. And that's my hope for the future, is that we really can come up with a way to do voting that does not have to have that trade-off between security and participation.
Do the facilitators want to say anything about their experience before we conclude?
Well, I really enjoyed the experience. And, even though I could appreciate some of the frustration and disappointment that we didn't have more diversity within our group, and it would have been rich and that's something to aim for. By the same token, it was just a real pleasure to be witnessing, a group of people who really care about voting and talking about the different actions and the different possibilities, and at times learning things from one another. It was rich, and also it was good for me to practice not jumping in with my particular opinion or what I thought. It's good training. It stretches, it grows me some.
I did pass my hat to Susanna once because I just couldn't hold it back. But we benefited from having some folks with very extensive experience in the system and the planning and all that. So I learned a lot from that and appreciated it.
And we got to some other topics outside, like redistricting and things like that.
Yeah, that's true.
We did discuss what a pervasive problem it is trying to get a politically diverse group of people into conversations like this.
It is.
But we had a diverse set of backgrounds in our group, and it made for a really interesting conversation. We had no trouble filling up the time.
We didn't either. Kathy.
I'm in Seattle, and the media tends to paint Texas as this mob of hair on fire, wild-eyed people. And this whole group just put the lie to that. I just want to.
They're here. They're
no
here.
Wild hair. No wild hair.
I think there's more diversity in barbecue and barbecue skills here than there would be anything else. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to thank you because I felt very warmly welcomed by this family.
Super. Well, I can't thank you all enough. And I'm going to ask Ham if he can download the names of all of the participants, because I would hate to lose them. And I want to make sure that I can thank you all for the participation. We will be culling this videotape, and we've recorded the whole thing. We can't record breakout sessions, but we can record the beginning and the conversation that we had at the end. And we will put that up on our Common Ground for Texans website. I can let you know when they're up, when it's up and available. You can certainly share it with your friends. And you can do one of these forums yourself. All of this information is available on the National Issues Forum's website. They have the video there, they have the advisory there, they have a training video for facilitators that's excellent. So, we can make this happen nationwide if you want. I mean, just go for it, right?
That's great, Joanne. I'd like to just say one other quick thing, and I have a question. Also, two of our participants shared their own personal experiences with trying to help someone else vote. And that was very moving for me. I really felt that in my heart. I'm so glad I got to hear the stories. And the other thing is, Joanne, do you want us facilitators to fill out the survey?
If you would, that would be great. Many of you took notes. In my group, Pam has the notes. If you could just type them up real quick and send them to me, or send me the worksheet at the back of the advisor's guide, that would be great. What I would like to do when we put this up, when we put the video up, is to share a couple of quotes. And I think that would be well worthwhile for people to be able to see. So with that,
thanks for holding this. That was I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thanks
Joanne.
for the facilitators.
Thank you, Ham.
Yeah, I'm glad we have folks from all over the place. It was great. And we'll try to do something maybe next month. We'll see.